Hello, everyone, and good evening. I'm Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. Tonight, we'll dive into the U.S. elections as more Democrats are calling on Joe Biden to drop out of the presidential race. We'll talk about who can replace Biden on the Democratic ticket and the implications this could have for our region. We'll also touch upon the jobs within the top jobs within the European Commission and what they entail for Poland. My guest tonight will be MEP Kosco, a Polish member of the European Parliament from the Poland 2050 Party and Renew Europe. So stay with us. But first off, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has become the first foreign leader to attend a British cabinet meeting in almost 3 decades. An IT outage has caused major disruptions across the globe, with thousands of canceled flights and customers cut off from many services. The first athletes move into the Olympic Village. Ursula von der Leyen will become the European Commission president. This, among other decisions, was made during this week's first plenary session of the 10th European Parliament. But while we know who the president will be, we still don't know much about the future commissioners. Our correspondent Sasha Farbach was in Strasbourg, France this week and can shed some more light on this question. Let's take a look.
Now that Ursula von der Leyen has clinched another 5-year mandate as head of the Commission, the next puzzling task begins in earnest, choosing her next commissioners. Now, there will be 27 in all, 1 from each member state, and much is at stake as the executive of the EU is responsible for forming legislation for the bloc and guiding policy on all things from the internal market, defense, climate policy, and much beyond that. Some spots are now set: Germany via von der Leyen, also the new High Rep Kaja Kallas from Estonia, although Kallas, like the other nominations, still must be approved by MEPs in the fall, a time when parliamentarians can flex their political muscle, even reject nominations as they have in the past. Some leaders were displeased at von der Leyen last time around 5 years ago when she wanted leaders to send her 2 choices, with some voices saying this gave her too much power. Already certain capitals have made it clear they will send only 1 nominee. Latvia will once again propose Vice President Trade Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis with the hope of an econ-related portfolio. Slovakia also has decided, according to President Pellegrini, to nominate Vice President Green Deal Commissioner Maroš Šefčovič. For some countries, that selection process of commissioners remains a sensitive and highly political issue. Poland's expectation is that a high-level portfolio that fits the nominee. Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski had been touted as being Warsaw's choice for defense commissioner, a new role which is yet to be created, although recently Mr. Sikorski has expressed his disinterest and to some diplomatic sources may not be keen at all to enter the Parliament. With some diplomatic sources saying Piotr Serafin, the current acting permanent rep for Poland in Brussels, as another potential name in the works. There will be the prerogative, ultimately, of Prime Minister Donald Tusk, who will submit his choice in the coming weeks. According to EU insiders, the new College of Commissioners is set to be in shape by November 1st, with much geographic and political wrangling ahead. It will be not a relaxing summer at all for Mrs. von der Leyen, nor the capitals of the EU member states, with much hanging in the balance. Sasha Farbach at the European Parliament in Strasbourg for TVP World.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has become the first foreign leader in 30 years to brief the British government at a cabinet meeting during his visit to London. Our Ukraine correspondent Oz Katerji joins us live from Kyiv with the details. Good evening, Oz. This seems like quite a significant moment for British-Ukrainian relations. What was Kyiv hoping to get from the president's visit?
Good evening, Don. Yes, as you said, it's nearly 3 decades since the last time this happened. The last world leader that did this was in 1997, and it was Bill Clinton. So it goes to show just how, significant this is, that the next leader to do it after Clinton is Zelensky. Now, there have been several issues that Zelensky has been trying to get support on. The biggest one, which he mentioned today, is wanting to conduct long-range strikes inside Russian territory using Western equipment. Now, the British have supplied Storm Shadows alongside France. These are cruise missiles that were designed and built alongside France. Now, today, Zelensky at the cabinet meeting asked Prime Minister Keir Starmer to show your leadership with regards to permitting Kyiv to be able to use these weapons, these storm shadows, to strike inside Russia, particularly these airfields where Russia has been launching glide bombs from. Now, Britain will need to coordinate with France for something like this to be given permission. It's not as easy as Keir Starmer just saying, yes, you've got this permission. So there remains to be seen if and when this is going to be, if Kyiv's going to be given this permission by Britain. But this was certainly something that Kyiv is hoping to get out of this meeting. Now, the other thing that should be noted about today is Britain announced a further sanctions on 11 oil tankers, Russian oil tankers, that it's been using to ship oil across the world. And they've had the European Union support this initiative. So further movement on sanctions. But what Kyiv will be really hoping for is permission to use storm shadows inside Russian territory.
Oz Chatterjee reporting from Kyiv. Thank you very much for that report. This morning's cyber outage caused major disruptions around the globe, with canceled flights and customers cut off from many services. An update by cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike was responsible for the crash of Microsoft software, which is used by businesses worldwide. Marek Steele has more on this in his report.
Cancelled flights, delays, chaos. This was what passengers at major airports worldwide experienced this morning. Poland also saw delays, especially at the Gdańsk and Poznań airports.
As you can see behind me, there's a huge crowd here. Some of the flights are delayed by a few hours. My flight to Venice is delayed by 3 hours, and we are still waiting for some new information.
A huge blackout of Microsoft software caused the disruption. In many cases, airlines had to switch to analog.
The person needed like 1 minute to prepare the documentation. Now in analog, they need 5 or 7 till 10 minutes. It's more complicated. Yeah, that's the reason why we have delays. Yeah, it's not danger for the operation, but it's delayed. It's a little problematic for passengers, for everybody.
Airlines were not the only sector to experience disruption. Poland's Baltic Hub container terminal experienced significant difficulties on Friday morning.
This is not a cyber attack of any kind. We are dealing with a situation where there was a bug in the software, or rather a bug in the update of the Windows operating system.
The company responsible for the failure, CrowdStrike, apologized for the incident and vowed to help Microsoft clients get their operations back online. Throughout the day, Polish authorities have assured that the cyber outage is not impacting state services.
All state forces and services are working to secure critical infrastructure. This is a continuous process. Poland is on high alert all the time due to attacks in cyberspace.
This time the disruptions were caused by a bug, but major Polish airports have been targeted in cyber attacks in recent days. Among them, Rzeszów, a major hub for supplies headed to Ukraine. Marek Steele, TVP World.
The Polish Public Prosecutor's Office is investigating threats made against a Belarusian defector, Paweł Latuszko. According to our findings, the case involves a foreign intelligence agent. Kazimierz Wysiak has more.
Paweł Latuszko, a former Belarusian culture minister who defected to Poland, has been receiving numerous death threats over the span of the last 2 years. The situation has gotten so serious that the Polish services have had to step in.
The Łódź branch of the Department for Organized Crime and Corruption is investigating the actions of an individual acting for foreign intelligence against the Republic of Poland, who persuaded an identified individual to kill Belarusian oppositionist Paweł L.
So far, no charges have been laid against any of the suspects. To find out more, we've spoken to Siechej Pelesa, one of the hosts at TVP's Belarusian channel Bielsat. Siechej has spoken with Paweł Latuszko about his situation numerous times.
It's difficult to live with threats made at you for several years. Some of them are very brutal, like a threat to be killed with an axe. Another time he learned that there was a hit on his head made on the darknet for $30,000.
The news of the investigation coincided with the Belarusian regime offering to hold talks with the Polish government on the situation on the Polish-Belarusian border. According to CIA, such offers should be taken with a grain of salt.
Lukashenko's regime wants to be treated equally to the democratically elected government in Poland. That's the desire of the regime, which is not legal. Lukashenko was never chosen. He's an usurper.
Polish officials have no intention of accepting the proposal of Alexander Lukashenko, the Belarusian dictator, at least not until their own conditions have been met.
Firstly, Belarus needs to give up the murderer of the Polish border guard. Secondly, they need to put an end to the migration pressure on our border. As all evidence says, it's an organized operation. Finally, there are political prisoners in Belarus, wrongly imprisoned, like Andrzej Poczobut and Aleś Białacki. They must be released.
The Polish Foreign Ministry says it intends to protect all members of the Belarusian opposition who defect and find refuge right here in Poland. Everywhere he goes, Paweł Latuszka has to be accompanied by a bodyguard. That small inconvenience is a small price he has to pay for going up against the Belarusian regime. Hopefully, the only price he ever has to pay. From Warsaw, TVP World, Kazimierz Łysiak.
In a bid to tackle European dependency on Chinese imports of crucial materials, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz visited Serbia. Together with Serbian President Alexander Vučić, Scholz attended a summit at which Serbia signed a memorandum with the European Union. The document concerned a strategic partnership on sustainable raw materials, battery supply chains, and electric cars.
Germany, Europe's largest car maker, is seeking to secure lithium for its electric vehicle manufacturers as the EU struggles to reduce its dependence on Chinese imports. China currently holds much sway over the supply chain for lithium-ion batteries, which are predominantly used in electric vehicles and mobile devices.
We need to reduce our dependencies. We need to have resilient structures in our supply chains. And that means that we have to develop new sources of raw materials all over the world. By mining lithium here in Serbia, we are increasing this resilience and at the same time promoting the modernization of our industry. And we are also achieving our climate targets.
Upon arrival, Scholz was greeted not only by the Serbian authorities, but also by the country's environmental activists.
Lithium is always extracted in remote locations far from populated areas. This is carried out in certain arid regions where there is nothing around for 100 kilometers. You just do not do this in areas where you will harm the historical heritage, where people live, where there is a high population density, and where some of the most breathtaking scenery can be found.
Their protests were closely tied to Scholz's visit. They concerned the Serbian government reactivating mining giant Rio Tinto's license to develop Europe's biggest $2.4 billion lithium mine in the country. Once completed, the project could supply up to 90% of Europe's current lithium demand. The mine is also meant to provide a major boost to Serbia's international position, likely improving its perception among foreign investors.
I think Serbia has been increasingly working and improving its productive capacity, especially in batteries recently. It's part of the EU framework to try to bring closer to home critical materials and battery capacity.
Despite Serbia's controversial diplomatic choices, it seems the country has managed to secure the development of a major asset, one which will amplify its voice on the European stage.
U.S. President Joe Biden's re-election bid is being questioned by top members of the Democratic Party. Given Biden's poor performance at the first presidential debate, as well as his COVID-19 diagnosis and cognitive decline, many Democrats believe he should drop out of the race.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
Despite Joe Biden's self-proclaimed readiness to continue campaigning,
President Zelensky.
People on his team aren't sure if he should. Ever since the incumbent president's poor performance in the presidential debate, more and more Democrats are coming out with statements outright opposing Biden's re-election bid. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and even former U.S. President Barack Obama all voiced concerns about Biden being the prime candidate of the Democratic Party. In their eyes, Joe Biden will not only lose the White House, but also cost the party any chance of winning back the U.S. House of Representatives in the November 5th election, giving the Republicans a majority in both chambers of Congress.
I think that's a big deal, especially for someone like Nancy Pelosi, to have her conversation come out in the news, even though it didn't come directly from her. She's very much somebody who likes to do things sort of quietly and in the background and then have a very unified front.
According to a Washington Post ABC News Ipsos poll published this month, 44% of all Americans, including 70% of Democrats, believe Biden should not run for re-election. As for who should replace Biden if he drops out of the race, voters are divided, with Kamala Harris securing only 29% of Democrat support. Even more worryingly, 50% of voters were unable to or refused to answer this question. Despite the grim outlook, Biden and his team claim that he will continue to run in the election. However, according to the president himself, a serious medical condition could make him reconsider his own re-election bid. Joe Biden was diagnosed with COVID earlier this week, but said he feels well and will continue running. No matter how resilient President Biden is, however, national presidential election polls spell his defeat as of now, with former President Donald Trump gaining over 3% of votes following his assassination attempt last week. Despite their concerns about Joe Biden's ability to beat Trump, the Democratic Party is likely to still nominate the incumbent president as their main candidate during the virtual Democratic Party committee meeting this Friday. However, given the recent calls for Biden to abandon his re-election bid, political analysts and experts say we could see the former president reconsider running in the election within the next few days.
And now to the world of sport. The first athletes have begun moving into the Olympic Village in the northern part of Paris in the metro area. The French capital will host the Summer Olympic Games from July 26th to August 11th.
The Olympic Village is bustling with life as athletes who will represent their countries in the 33rd edition of the Summer Olympics have started to arrive in Saint-Denis near Paris, where they will spend the next 3 weeks. Ukrainian athletes were some of the first to arrive on Friday. The Olympic Village can accommodate about 14,000 athletes, their coaches and other staff members. Polish athletes have also begun arriving after taking their Olympic oath at the Olympic Center in Warsaw on Thursday.
My expectations now are air conditioning in the room and good training beforehand. Nothing else interests me.
213 Polish athletes will compete at this year's Olympic Games. For the first time in history, Poland will be represented by more women than men.
The clear and obvious one to state is Iga Świątek in the women's tennis. So she is a big fan of playing on the clay surface and in Paris, where she's found a lot of success before. Added bonus for her is that Sabalenka, a main rival in the women's tennis, will not compete. Other than that, there are a lot of hopes pinned on the men's volleyball team, currently ranked #1 in the world.
After the event, the Saint-Denis Olympic Village will be transformed into an apartment complex, offices and shops. The opening ceremony of the Games is scheduled for next week.
You should expect a large fresco of approximately 3 hours and 45 minutes, which will interweave the parade of athletes, the artistic performances, and the staged elements of protocol. We will not follow the usual structure of the ceremonies for a great celebration, which will highlight our shared humanity, this great us that we are. This is to say us here in Paris, us in France, us in Europe, but also us in the world.
The Olympic Games will end on August 11th.
And now joining me here on World News Tonight to discuss the developments in the U.S. presidential elections and in the European Commission as the top jobs are still being doled out is MEP Kosco, Polish MEP from Renew Europe and Poland 2050. Hello, sir, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Now, let's go ahead and start off with the United States. There are reports coming out that Joe Biden may tender his resignation, not from necessarily the presidency, but he may drop out of the race to allow an open field of candidates as it's becoming clearer and clearer that he may not be able to serve as another president. So looking at this, who are some good contenders, in your opinion, that might be able to fill the void and would be able to compete with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance?
Look, you have to start with saying very frankly that it will be up to President Biden whether he wants to move on or he wants to resign from the race. That will be his sole decision. He's the decision maker here, not his family, not his party, but himself. Definitely there's a rising pressure right now that we see in the whole of the United States and also inside the Democratic Party, pushing him to at least consider resigning at that point. There's not much time left, actually, because in the middle of mid-August, we're going to have the convention, the Democratic Party convention in Chicago, and they will have to make a final decision about their nominee. So if President Biden is seriously considering to withdraw from the race, this decision has to be taken as soon as possible. And there are not, you're asking about candidates, there are not many options on the table, actually, because it's not time to consider somebody who's not known publicly, who's not a public figure, who doesn't have a huge, I would say, public posture. You have to choose somebody who's already there, who's already on the stage. And frankly speaking, I do not see today any other possible candidates rather than Vice President Kamala Harris, because she's there. She was serving to her country during the Biden times. She was, I must say, pretty visible when the war in Ukraine started. After the start of the Russian aggression in Ukraine, she was very visible, very active. Recently, we lost her from our perspective. She's not very visible on our radars right now, but again, there's not much time left to start considering other options, other personalities, because the decision has to be taken right now.
Democratic National Committee, you think that they were maybe not on their game in this matter? Should they have been promoting other people amongst, other Democrats for maybe earlier, putting them out in front of the United States, in front of the American people, so they could have some continuation to their party?
Look,
right?
we are asking ourselves these questions. Mm-hmm. What happened to the U.S. political system that at the end of the day, there are not so many maneuvers possible right now, not so many scenarios which are practical and available. You have a system, the largest democratic state in the universe, on our planet. And at the end of the day, you have Trump and Biden, Biden and Trump, and nobody else. Look, that's the system. We have to face the reality. We will not change the system. It's up to Americans to change the system if they see ways to really improve, to upgrade the political system. Right now, we have two aging guys fighting against each other, and one of them seems to be visibly much weaker than the other one.
If, in fact, they do propose some new candidates, some would say that this could put Democrats actually at somewhat of an advantage instead of putting in, say, a candidate much earlier. Because the election cycle, if you look in the United States, especially in the presidential elections, they're now about 2 years long. So about 2 years into the presidency, the election starts for the next election. The candidates start coming out and the campaign starts. So with such small, I guess, lead time going up to the elections, could this be an advantage for Democrats to not undergo the heavy media scrutiny that all the other candidates have to undergo for two years?
I still believe that could be a positive scenario. We had cases, we had examples. We had our own case in 2020 presidential race in Poland, where when we had the candidacy of Małgorzata Kidawa-Błońska to become president of our country, and her ranks were going down so dramatically that at the end of the day, the party decided to withdraw her and to put mayor of Warsaw, Rafał Trzaskowski, instead. So there are options, and sometimes you can imagine that there is kind of a new dynamics, new power, kind of re-engineering the final weeks of the campaign. Because with Biden, you have to promote, sorry to say, you have to promote the loser. While with a new person in the game, on the table and actively engaging in the campaign, you can still imagine that somebody like, for example, Vice President Kamala Harris, a woman, an experienced politician, somebody who could easily fight against Trump, also using the language that he is using, for example, the language which is anti-women language, let's put it this way. So I believe that might be a right choice. It's very late, but it's not too late to help Democrats win.
Well, there is a short list of candidates. We'll have to see who can gain some momentum. But first, as you mentioned, we'll have to see if President Biden takes that decision to step down. Now, returning here to Europe, we just had the first plenary session of the European Parliament. This week, Ursula von der Leyen has been chosen again as President of the European Commission, but now we're waiting for the commissioners to be nominated, chosen. So first of all, from Poland's perspective, are there any names we should be looking at, or any particular positions within the Commission that would be really good for Poland?
Look, that's just the beginning of the process, because yes, the majority of us, and I was one of the MEPs who supported Ursula von der Leyen in yesterday's voting in Strasbourg, we decided to give her this job for the second time. But now the real, I would say, game and the race starts, because she will construct her European government, if you like, the European Commission. But this will be not only her to decide. I would say mainly this will be up to the member states, the government of the member states, European countries, to decide whom they want to pick for their commissioners and what kind of portfolio they would love to have. In case of Poland, we know perfectly well that we had the commissioner in charge of agriculture during previous 5 years term. So I do not think that we will have another commissioner in charge of that area of agriculture and farming. But there are many portfolios that might be interesting for Poland. But again, this is the game which just right now starts. The countries will show what kind of priorities they have. So it's about the personalities, the commissioners or the candidates for commissioners that the countries will come up with, but there are also portfolios. For Poland, just to give you a more concrete answer, well, definitely interesting issue would be the enlargement policy of the EU, because we know perfectly well that Ukraine is there, Moldova is there, Western Balkans countries are there waiting to join the EU. But also what Ursula von der Leyen confirmed yesterday, that she will be launching a new commissioner in charge of defense of Europe. We believe this is the right decision. It was discussed for weeks and months, and we supported the idea. We believe this is a high time for Europe to be really serious about the security and defense. Therefore, there should be a commissioner. It might be a Pole, it might be somebody from Eastern Europe. So again, this is just the beginning.
Before we go, very quickly, because we have about 30 seconds left, I just have to ask you, many people have asked if Radosław Sikorski would be interested, or would he be considered for such a job as the defense commissioner if it is created? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, he might become a commissioner for defense. He might become also the high representative in charge of the foreign policy of the European. There are many positions that he could really do and take in Europe. Firstly, this needs to be a decision of the government, obviously, and the prime minister. But firstly, it has to be Radek Sikorski to decide. We know that he has also other ambitions, rather domestic ambitions. And I'm talking about the next year's race for the president of Poland. So first he has to decide whether he wants to stay in domestic politics. I was talking to many folks in Brussels and Strasbourg, and they are mentioning his name among the top candidates. But again, he has to decide whether he's staying here or he wants to be active in Brussels.
So he has options. Okay, MEP Kosco, Polish MEP for Renew Europe and Poland 2050. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Good night.